There is a literary device, and you see it some in movies, where you start at the end of the story and then you go back to the beginning because the end of the story piques your interest and you want to know how it got there. So you go back to the beginning and you fill in the blanks, and then the rest of the movie or the book, the story, whatever, is about that. And then you get to the end and you go, oh, that's intriguing, that's interesting. We're going to kind of do that today. We're going to look at the end of the story, and then we're going to go back to the beginning and fill in the blanks. We're going to begin in 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 14 through 19, and this is where Elisha is about to die. So he is a prophet who is about to die, and we have a king named Joash, king of Israel, who hears that he is sick and comes to him because, again, there's a battle that's looming, and it's with Syria, and they've kind of been in and out of war with Syria, and so he's trying to figure out what to do. Now, Joash is one of those kings. You know, you look at the history of Israel, the history of Judah. After Solomon, they had a good king, bad king, and kind of they went through this cycle of good and bad kings. Joash is neither. He's not particularly good that you go, oh, that's David, that's Solomon, that's these other guys like Josiah or Nehemiah, Hezekiah. That's the one I was thinking of. Not like those guys, but also not evil like Ahab. You know, he's just one of those kings. And so he comes to Elisha and wants to know what to do with Syria. And so Elisha tells him, he says, take the bow. And he takes the bow and he puts his hand on it and he blesses him. And he says, now shoot the arrow out the window. So he shoots the arrow out the window and he says, you're gonna be all right. He says, now take the arrows and strike the ground. Now, it's not real clear in the story whether he's supposed to take the arrows and strike the ground like this, or whether he's shooting them into the ground. In my head, I picture him shooting them in the ground. That's just the way that it kind of, because he's shooting out the window, it makes sense that he would then shoot in the ground. But it says, the Bible tells us that he strikes the ground 3 times. So it seems to me that he got an arrow, he looked down, he struck the ground, he got another one, he looked down, he struck the ground, and he did it the 3rd time, and then he quit. And it just says that Elisha was angry. He got wroth because he stopped. He said, why'd you stop? Because you only struck the ground 3 times, you're going to win for a little while against Syria, but ultimately, they're going to win. Otherwise, if you had it more in you, if you'd have just gone 5 or 6 times, you would have completely rid yourself of the problem of Syria. You had more, this is the way it doesn't say this is the way I picture it. You had more in your quiver. You had more arrows to shoot. Why'd you stop? So Joash, not being necessarily a good king, not necessarily a bad king, asking Elisha. And Elisha comes to this point and says, what kind of comes to my mind is, why'd he get upset? Why'd he get angry? And to understand that, I think it helps us to go back to the beginning of Elisha's journey, and that will help us to fill in the blanks as to why he was upset with Joash for not shooting more arrows. And the study this morning will be on incomplete commitment. There were more arrows in his quiver. And therefore, the job wasn't complete. It was incomplete. He was not quite committed to the cause. In 2 Kings chapter 19, this is when Elijah is told, the prophet is told to go find Elisha. And when he goes and finds him, he says, he's your successor. And he finds Elisha with 12 yoke of oxen. He's working the field. Now, he's not just got a team, he's got a team. He's got 12 yoke of oxen. That's at least 24. And so he's really working. I'm not a cow guy, like Sean. not a cow guy, but I can't imagine driving that many and trying to plow the field and all that stuff. But it says that when Elijah came, Elisha recognized it, and he said, let me go tell my parents goodbye. So he goes and he does that. It's 1 Kings 19 verse 21 says, and he returned back from him and took a yoke of oxen and slew them and boiled their flesh with the instruments of the oxen and gave them to the people, and they did eat. Then he arose and went after Elijah and ministered unto him. Do you see what's happening here? That was his livelihood. It's not just a hobby for him. This was something that he did for a living. That's how he ate, was by these yoke of oxen. But they were beasts of burden. They were working for him. And when it came time for him to go with Elijah, he didn't leave them. He ate them. All those instruments, everything that he was using to work those animals, he used them to burn them. He burned it all up. You know what he's saying? I'm done with this and I'm moving on to this. That was a little rapid. Sorry. He was done doing that, and he completely changed. And he was completely focused on working with Elijah. He was completely committed. There are some who would suggest that the sum of Christianity is to attend the assembly. That as long as I attend the assembly, I'm all right. What do you think Elisha would say to that? He burned everything up so he could be committed to that cause. It wasn't, okay, I'll go do this with Elijah, and then I'll go home for a little while and do my thing, and then I'll go back out with Elijah, and then I'll go home and I'll do my thing. No, he burned it all. He was done. He was all in, committed every day. He was going to eat, drink, and sleep, living with Elijah and doing the work of the prophet. In Amos chapter 5 verse 21 says, I despise your feast days, and I will not smell in your solemn assemblies. Though ye offer me burnt offerings and your meat offerings, I will not accept them. Neither will I regard the peace offerings of your fat beasts. Take thou away from me the noise of thy songs, for I will not hear the melody of the viols. But let judgment run down as waters, and righteousness as a mighty stream. Have ye offered unto me sacrifices and offerings in the wilderness 40 years, O house of Israel? But ye have borne the tabernacle of your Moloch, and Chian your images, the star of your God, which ye made to yourselves. The assembly that I've ordained, the singing that you praise to me, I hate it. That's what he's saying. I don't want to smell it. Even though you're burning the incense, I don't want to smell it. Something that was supposed to smell good smelled foul to God. Why? Because even in the assemblies, even though they were technically doing it right, everything else was wrong. Every day they were offering these sacrifices to these idols, to the stars, to the different gods, and all those things. But on the day of assembly, well, they come to the assembly and assume God was okay with that. He wasn't okay with that. We can't just live our life, do whatever we want to every day, go back to the oxen every other day, and come to the assembly and think God's going to be all right with me. What he wants is a complete and total commitment. I want you to notice all these different passages. Let him deny himself and take up his cross daily, follow me. And they continued daily with one accord, and daily in the temple, and receive the word with all readiness of mind, and search the scriptures daily, but exhort one another daily. Christianity is every day. It's not part-time, it's not half-time, it's not even full-time. It's all the time. That's Christianity. That's what God expects. God is all in with you. He expects you to be all in with Him. And we see that as evidenced in the giving of His Son, Jesus Christ. Do you know that there are 168 hours in a week? 168 hours in a week. If you attend the assemblies, every assembly in the week, you might get 3 hours, depending on who's preaching. That's less than 2% of your week in hours. Less than 2%. Is that really your Christianity? Is that the best you have to give? Think about it this way. Do you want 2% from God? Or do we want all? You want His all. He deserves your all. Every day, all in, complete commitment. We can't just view the assembly as if that's it. I've done my duty. I'm all right. 1 John chapter 1 and verse 5, this then is the message which we have heard of Him and declare unto you that God is light and in Him is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with Him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not the truth. But if we walk in the light as He is in the light, we have fellowship one with another, and the blood of Jesus Christ, His Son, cleanseth us from all sin. I want you to notice that first of all, he's talking about a lifestyle. He says, this is who God is. God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all. And if we want to have a relationship with Him, if we say that we have a fellowship or a relationship with Him, then there's a certain way we ought to be, because that's the way He is. So the essence of who He is the essence of who we are to be. In the NIV it says it this way, and yet, the second part of that, and yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not live out the truth. But if we walk in the light as He is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, His Son, purifies us from all sin. We have to live out the light. We have to walk in the light. That means that we are to be faithful to Him. So who He is who we should also be. We are to walk, to practice that life for Him, with Him. That's how we have fellowship or relationship with Him. Think of assembly kind of like practice. I'm not near into sports like I used to be. I used to be really a big fan, and you might think, well, why are we using a sports illustration? Well, Paul did it several times, so I guess if Paul did, I can. But I want you to go back with me to my sophomore year in high school. When I started football, I barely played. I didn't know anything, so I barely played. These other kids had played before. 8th grade, I barely came off the field. There was one play in particular every once in a while that I would come off the field. 9th grade, I went in half the time. My sophomore year in high school, I'm playing with the junior varsity, which was pretty common for sophomores, and I was the starting wide receiver for the JV. I was a lot thinner back then, so go with me. I was a starting wide receiver until game time. And at game time, one of the juniors who was playing with the varsity would come down. I would practice every day with the JV. But I wouldn't get to play with the JV when it came to game time because the junior who was practicing with the varsity came down and played for me. And those plays when I was in 8th grade where I came out, that was the only time I ever went in. You know what? When all you do is practice, that gets pretty old. I wasn't all that excited about going to the games anymore because I knew that guy who had never even practiced with us was the one that was going to play. And he was playing in my place. And I just stood on the sidelines. After all that work throughout the week, now there's a place for that, don't misunderstand me. We need everybody out there, and if you're the practice squad, you're helpful, you're helping the team and all that stuff. Don't get me wrong. But when you go from being on the field all the time, then half the time, and then no time, I mean, that gets pretty hard to get excited about Monday practice. Don't treat the assembly like it's practice and then go out through the week and don't get in the game. That's the point. What are we practicing for if we're not going to get in the game? Because you're in the game one way or the other. Are you going to fight for it or not? You're going to play? You're going to get involved or not? Because that's what I want to help us see, that the assembly is kind of like practice in that way. In 2 Kings chapter 2, we going back to Elisha, because Elisha helps us to understand, first of all, why he needed more, because every day he was committed. And it just looked like Joash wasn't. Okay, so now, when you consider 2 Kings chapter 2, this is the end of Elijah's life, and he is about to be taken by God by the chariot. And as he is approaching that, I want you to notice some things in the exchange, in the communication from Elijah to Elisha, and then what Elisha says back. In verse 2 says, Elijah said unto Elisha, Tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord hath sent me to Bethel. And Elisha said unto him, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. So they went down to Bethel. So as they are getting close to Bethel, Elijah says to Elisha, You wait here, I'm going on. What is Elisha's response? I'm going with you. I am with you. And so they went on to Bethel. Verse 4. He was going to go to Jericho. And he says, You can stay here in Jericho. What does Elisha say? I'm with you. I'm not leaving you. We're going to see a pattern here. Verse 6. Elijah said as they were coming to Jordan, he said, You can stay here. And Elisha says, I'm not going anywhere. I am with you. And so as they approach the Jordan, he tells them, Look, what do you want? What is it that you want? He says, I want a double portion of your power, of your spirit. He says, if you're still with me when I'm taken, and you see it, then that's what you'll have. We're going to pick up in verse number 7 of 2 Kings chapter 2. I think I have it. Yep, there it is. 2 Kings chapter 2 and verse number 7. And 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood to view afar off, and they too stood by Jordan. And Elijah took his mantle and wrapped it together and smote the waters, and they were divided hither and thither, so that they too went over on dry ground. And it came to pass when they were gone over that Elijah said unto Elisha, Ask what I shall do for thee before I be taken away from thee. And Elisha said, I pray thee, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon me. And he said, Thou hast asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if thou see me when I am taken from thee, it shall be so unto thee. But if not, it shall not be so. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, My father, the chariot of Israel, and the horsemen thereof. And he saw him no more, and he took hold of his own clothes and rent them in two pieces. He took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and went back and stood by the bank of Jordan. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and smote the waters, and said, Where is the Lord God of Elijah? And when he had also smitten the waters, they parted hither and thither, and Elisha went over. So he says, What do you want? He says, I want double portion. He says, if you see me, that's going to happen. 50 people stayed on the other side of the Jordan. Notice it said the two went on. Elijah and Elisha. Did he ever leave him? No. He said, I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving you in Bethel. I'm not leaving you in Jericho. I'm not leaving you at the Jordan. I'm going with you. And he saw it. And he picked up the mantle, and he received the double portion. And he struck the ground just like Elijah, and he walked across the Jordan on dry ground. when people say that the Christian life is the daily life, and that's all there is to that, how do you suppose Elisha would say to that? Elisha was there. Elisha was present. Are you present? Or are you skipping out on the assemblies? Are you skipping out on times that we can be together? Have you ever heard somebody say, well, I don't have to go to the assembly because I can find God? Out here in nature or whatever, I go to the mountains and I find God or whatever. I go and I get away from people to go find God. Is that what God says to do, to find God? Or to be with His people? To be present? We need to be present. And that's why one of the reasons why Elisha might have been upset. You've got more arrows in your quiver and you're not giving it your all. Daily life and attend the assembly. In Acts chapter 2, we notice something here about the beginning of the church. Acts 2 and verse 42. And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship, and in breaking of bread and in prayers, and fear came upon every soul. And many wonders and signs were done by the apostles, and all that believed were together and had all things common, and sold their possessions and goods, and parted them to all men, as every man had need. Here in verse 42, it says they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, breaking bread, fellowship, and prayers. Now what we don't see is the absence of a word that is actually here. It's just not been translated. So I'm going to insert them, if you will. They continued in the apostles' doctrine and the fellowship and the breaking of bread and the prayers. He's talking about the assembly. Later on, he talks about breaking bread from house to house. That's not the breaking of bread. That's not the fellowship. There is a fellowship that we have, but the fellowship is when we come together. That's where it started. It starts with joining together. Then the daily life we live in a certain way. Assembling for teaching, for building relationships, and for communing together. That's where it started, but look where it ends. Verse 46. And they, continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. It started with the assembly. It ended by stronger relationships, such as they were spending time together every day. And in doing so, what happens to the people? The rest of the people, they had favor with them. That means that the people looked at the church with favor. That's good people right there. That's with favor. And then what? The Lord added to the church every day those who are being saved. It starts with the assembly. It doesn't end there. That's not it. The assembly is when we can be most vulnerable. And it's in those vulnerable moments that we truly get close to one another. See, we can be vulnerable here by putting our faith in God, putting our trust in Jesus to save. We can proclaim that with one another, and I know that you're doing the same. I can pour out my heart in praise to God and loving you. And when we all join together, it's a safe place where we can do that and we strengthen those relationships. When you go do that out there, what happens? Is everybody on your side? Is everybody praising with you? Does everybody trust God like this room does? They don't. And that's why we can be that with one another. And we can be open and truly praise God together. We need the assembly of the church so that we can build those relationships and encourage one another and help one another towards God. Attending the assembly or daily Christianity, it's not an either-or proposition. It's a this and. It's living daily and attending the assembly, or attending the assembly and living it daily. We've got to quit putting these two on extremes. But it's about living daily for God and being present, saying, I will not leave you. I'm here. Whatever might come, I'm with you. I'm here. I'm present. Ephesians chapter 4, beginning in verse 11. I don't have that on the screen, so Ephesians 4, verse 11. There it says, and he gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come in the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. But speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. He gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, shepherds, elders, bishops, whatever the term you want to use there. He used pastors and teachers. To do what? To do the work of the ministry? Well, certainly they have their part in that, but that's not the point. The point is to perfect or equip others, the body, to do the work of the ministry. And each person has their part that they are to do, and we are to do those different. So two people have their parts, they're to do those together in unison. And the work gets done by what every joint supplies. Not by every part, but every part doing its share with every other part together. That's the joint. Well, when you look at the hand has just a lot of parts to it. There's tendons and ligaments and joints and bones, skin, all those different things, muscles that make that hand work. We all have a part to do to make it work. And when we're at the assembly, we hear from the pastors, we hear from the teachers that are equipping us to do that work so that we can go together and do that work out there. And we do it together. We're joined together in that work. Part of that equipping happens right here. So be present. Hebrews 10 and verse 23. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as is the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Be present. Be a part of the team. I know we can look at this passage and we can think, well, the forsaking there means that I'm abandoning it altogether. That's true, but the same is also true. Be present. Be there. Don't get to the point where you might be forsaking altogether because you're forsaking some. Don't forsake it all. Be there. Be present. Be there because your team needs you. Because the person across the room here needs to hear your voice singing. Oh, not my voice. It's not very good. Yes, your voice. Because they need to hear it from here. If everybody's absent, nobody's here. I mean, I know that's very simplified, but that's just the case. If everybody acted like you do, would there be an assembly? Be in, be here, be present, be a part of the team. I want you to think about this for just a moment. There's 168 hours in the week, right? Let's just say you attend the Sunday morning only. So the Sunday morning only, I say, is about an hour and a half, right? You spend an hour and a half of practice, and you have 166.5 hours left in the week, and you think that hour and a half is going to prepare you for the rest of the week? Really? You're going to fail. There's a reason teams practice every day. We're not even asking you to do that every day. Just be present. Be present when you can be, or not when you can be. Make sure you're present even when you can't be. Be present when the church is present. That's the point. Some of you may know this picture. This is a famous rant that happened several years ago. I'm going to share what I can share with you. It is a little bit, I had to cut some words out. I'll just say it that way. But this guy is named Allen Iverson. He is one of the best basketball players to never win a championship. Just keep that in mind, to never win a championship. But he's considered one of the best players ever. Kind of revolutionized the point guard position, just in the way he played. This is after a playoff loss, okay? He says, if I can't practice, I can't practice. If I'm hurt, I'm hurt. Simple as that. It's not about that at all. But it's easy to talk about and sum it up when you just talk about practice. We're sitting here, and I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice. I mean, listen, we're talking about practice. Not a game, practice. Not a game, not the game that I go out and die for and play every game like it's my last. Not the game. We're talking about practice, man. I mean, how silly is that? We're talking about practice. He's kind of redundant. I know I'm supposed to be there. I know I'm supposed to lead by example. I know that, and I'm not shoving it aside like it don't mean anything. I know it's important. I do. I honestly do. But we're talking about practice, man. What are we talking about? Practice. This is his actual speech. We're talking about practice, man. We're talking about practice. We're talking about practice. We ain't talking about the game. We're talking about practice, man. When you come to the arena and you see me play, don't you? And the reporter says, absolutely. He then says, you see me give everything I got, right? And the reporter says, absolutely. Iverson says, but we're talking about practice right now. Reporter says, but it's an issue that your coaches continue to raise. Iverson says, look, I hear you. It's funny to me too. It's strange to me too, but we're talking about practice, man. We're not talking about the game, the actual game. When it matters, we're talking about practice. And a different reporter then says, is it possible, though, from where he's coming from, if you practiced, not you would be better, but your teammates? So Iverson says, how can I make my teammates better by practicing? The reporter says, so they can be used to playing with you. Iverson said, how can I make my teammates better by practicing? So they can be used to playing with you. He says, they should be used to playing with me. Those are my teammates. So my game is going to deteriorate because I'm not practicing with my teammates? Is my game going to get worse? I'm asking you, is my game going to get worse? So what about my game? Is my game going to get better because other players are hurt on my team? I mean, did that hurt me? Do you think that hurts me? I'm being honest. People are hurt on my team, but did that hurt me? Does that hurt me when I go out there and play 48 minutes? Does that hurt me as a player? Does that hurt me if this person is hurt or that person is hurt? Do it hurt me? You hear what he's saying? It's not about winning. It's not about finishing the race, the game. He doesn't care about his teammates. That's what it comes down to. He didn't want to be at practice. You get that? He didn't want to be there. And he didn't want to be forced to be there. He's the franchise player. He's the best, one of the best players to ever play and never win a championship. Do you wonder why? I think we can see in the rant. Because he wasn't worried about practice. Because he wasn't worried about his teammates. He wasn't considering them and how they needed to be encouraged and strengthened and helped by his presence there. So, it's about attending the assembly. Yes. It's about living every day. Yes. And we find this other story in 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 8 through 17. 2 Kings chapter 6 and verses 8 through 17. This just says that Syria, again, that same country that we started with, they're about to come to battle. And they hear about this prophet, and they're concerned about the prophet. Why do they keep winning? Why can't we just do this? So they hear about Elisha. And so they find out where Elisha is, and they surround them. And they send out a spy, Elisha does, and the spy gets sent out, and he finds out what's going on, and he comes back and he says, we're in trouble. They've surrounded us. And Elisha's calm. He's like, we got this. And the spy is that much more concerned. I want you to read what happens. Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man. And he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. You see what's happened here? Elisha didn't need to see it. He already believed it. He believed that they had victory because he believed that God was on his side. He was the kind of person that lived by faith. He lived from the inside out. He was able to do all those other things. And so what he's doing here is helping this young man to live by faith, to open his eyes to what was around him and know that God is on his side. He lived from an inside-out perspective. He was a spirit-led, faith-led man. So yeah, when Joash didn't empty his quiver, he didn't give it all, because he didn't see things from the inside out. Matthew chapter 23 and verse 1, Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do for what reason? For to be seen of men. They make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments. Look, you can live the life in the sense that you are living by the rules. You can attend every assembly and still be not right with God, to still be incomplete in your commitment because you're not living from the inside out. If you're doing it so the elders don't have to call you, you're doing it for the wrong reason. If you're doing it because mom would be disappointed, you're doing it for the wrong reason. We should be living it by faith, living it from the inside out. Notice what he says about those who do this to be seen of men. He says, outside they look good. They look like a cup that's been cleansed, but within they're full of extortion and excess. Go ahead, take a drink. You want to drink out of that cup? God doesn't either. And what we're not able to see, God sees. And He knows your motive. He knows why you're trying to do something. He knows if you're attending the assembly out of some obligation, not to serve God, but some other obligation. He knows what you do day to day. He also knows what you do day to day in front of people, and then what you do in secret when you're not in front of other people. God knows. That's the dirt that's inside. He goes on and say that they're like a tomb, a whited sepulcher. That it's real pretty, it's been whitewashed and real ornate. He says, even so, ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within you're full of hypocrisy and iniquity. It's full of dead men's bones. You can make the coffin look as pretty as you want to, but you know what's on the inside. It's rotting flesh. It's dead. And if you're the kind of person that's doing these things to be seen of men, that you're at every event, you're at every activity, you are present, but you're not living a faith-filled life, You're doing it to be seen of men. You're full of dead men's bones. You are full of hypocrisy. You're faking it. God knows it. That's what it means to be a hypocrite. It means that you're play acting, just like an actor in a movie. That's what it means. And you're full of iniquity, sin, and God knows it. Mark chapter 12 and verse 30. There we find God says to love, or Jesus says to love the Lord your God with all your heart. To love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your mind, and all your strength. It starts with the inner man, with the heart, the mind, and the soul, and then to the strength. That's where we begin to serve God, is from the inside out. What do you think Elisha would have thought of those that live the life without the proper motive? That don't really live from the inside out? Why do you think he burned all the equipment? Why was he present with Elisha? Or with Elijah? I knew I was going to do that at some point. Why was he there? Because he believed it. He was convicted by it. Why was he willing to not, why was he so calm in the midst of that battle? Because he knew God was on his side. Because he believed, he had faith. That's what motivated him. We're talking about an all-encompassing love of God that begins from the inside out. So yeah, he was upset because Joash didn't give it all he's got. What are you holding back? What are the arrows in your quiver? Why are they still in your quiver? That's the question. Or put another way, Matthew chapter 16 and verse number 26 says, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" What are you so willing to trade for your soul? Sex? Drugs? Alcohol? Time? Work? What is it? On Sunday mornings, sleep? What's in your quiver? You've got more to give. Don't be incomplete. Make sure that you are giving it all you have from the inside out. And that's why he was upset with Joash, because it was incomplete. You see it in the life of Elisha, the way that he lived his life, and the way that he conducted himself, and those expectations for everyone else were there too. For Joash was there too. And God expects the same from us. God gave his all. He wants your all. He expects your all. He put confidence in you. He had a trust in you that if he sent his son Jesus to die on the cross, that you would live for him. And he allowed himself to be vulnerable in that way, because he was giving something for you so that you could respond. He's not going to make you. And that's a very vulnerable position to be in, to give everything you got so that somebody else can respond. And he's asking the same from you. He trusted you, trust him. We're about to sing a song about giving control to him, giving him our all. Mind, body, soul, everything. Living from the inside out. Every day, always present. If you still have arrows in your quiver, allow yourself to be vulnerable. And trust us. Trust God. First of all, trust God that he'll forgive you. Second of all, trust us. There's no judgment here. All we want to do is help encourage you to be completely committed. And if we can help you with that, let us know by coming forward and sitting on the front while we stand and while we sing.